Silence is often misunderstood as loss, retreat, or diminishment, but in truth, it functions more like refinement than removal. Loss takes something essential away and leaves absence behind. Refinement, by contrast, removes what is unnecessary so that what is essential can remain intact and stronger. This distinction matters because many people interpret quiet seasons as evidence that they are shrinking, fading, or being overlooked, when in reality they are being clarified. Shrinking happens when fear suppression or external pressure forces a person to reduce themselves to survive. Refinement happens when life intentionally strips away noise so that identity, values, and direction can become precise. Silence does not erase who you are. It reveals who you are without distortion. In loud seasons, it is easy to confuse activity with progress, attention with alignment, and reaction with purpose. Noise creates motion, but motion is not always movement. Silence interrupts this illusion. It slows the pace enough for truth to surface. When the volume drops, distractions lose their power. Performative identities begin to feel hollow, and the parts of you that were sustained only by validation start to dissolve. What remains is not emptiness, but substance. Quiet seasons remove distortion by taking away external mirrors that once reflected back a version of you shaped by expectation rather than conviction. Without constant feedback, comparison, or commentary, you are forced to confront what actually motivates you, what unsettles you, and what anchors you when no one is watching. This is why silence often feels uncomfortable at first. It exposes internal movement that noise was masking. Unresolved fears, hidden ambitions, and unexamined habits rise to the surface because there is no longer enough stimulation to keep them buried. Many mistake this discomfort for regression, but it is actually awareness expanding. Awareness can feel destabilizing before it becomes stabilizing because it removes denial. Yet over time, this exposure produces clarity, not loss. You begin to notice that your reactions slow, not because you are less engaged, but because you are less reactive. Your values sharpen because you are no longer negotiating them in response to external pressure. Your discernment matures because you are no longer required to decide quickly to keep up with noise. Silence removes urgency and replaces it with intention. This shift is critical because urgency is often rooted in fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, or fear of becoming irrelevant. Intention, on the other hand, is rooted in trust. When silence teaches you to move intentionally, it retrains your nervous system to operate from stability rather than survival. You learn that not everything needs an immediate response, not every opportunity requires pursuit, and not every question deserves an answer. This internal retraining prepares you for sustainable peace. Peace is not the absence of responsibility or challenge. It is the presence of inner order. Without inner order, even good things create stress. With inner order, even pressure can be held without collapse. Quiet seasons are where this order is established. They teach you how to remain centered when nothing is affirming you externally. They show you how to sit with uncertainty without trying to control outcomes. They expose where your sense of worth was still tied to productivity, visibility, or approval, and they gently dismantle those dependencies. This dismantling is not punishment, it is protection. It prevents future increase from destabilizing you. Many people receive growth, wealth, or influence before their inner world is prepared, and the result is chaos disguised as success. Silence works in the opposite direction. It prepares the inner world first so that increase, when it comes, feels aligned rather than overwhelming. Aligned increase does not arrive as shock or disruption. It settles into systems that are already in place. Those systems are built in quiet seasons through consistency, restraint, and self-awareness. Silence teaches you how to manage yourself before you are asked to manage more. It shows you what you truly need and what you are merely using to regulate emotion. It clarifies your priorities so that when options expand, you are not confused by abundance. This is why silence is essential for sustainable peace. Peace that depends on external stability is fragile because circumstances inevitably change. Peace that is formed internally can withstand change without dissolving. Quiet seasons cultivate this kind of peace by removing the distractions that once kept you from knowing yourself deeply. In silence, you learn the difference between loneliness and solitude, between rest and avoidance, between patience and passivity. You learn how to wait without becoming stagnant and how to move without becoming impulsive. These lessons are subtle but foundational. They shape how you will handle future growth. Aligned increase requires clarity because growth always brings choice. More resources mean more decisions. More visibility means more interpretation. More influence means more responsibility. Without clarity, these additions create confusion. With clarity, they become manageable. Silence gives you that clarity. It teaches you to hear your own internal signals clearly so that external noise does not overpower them later. This is why silence is not an empty pause between meaningful moments. It is the workshop where meaning is formed. It refines identity so that it is not reactive, defensive, or dependent. It aligns desire with purpose so that pursuit does not become frantic. It prepares the inner world to receive without grasping and to hold without clinging. When silence completes its work, peace is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you carry, and when increase arrives, it does not demand that peace be sacrificed. Instead, it rests within it. This is the gift of refinement. Nothing essential is lost. What is false, inflated, or misaligned falls away, leaving behind a clearer, steadier version of you. That version is not smaller. It is more precise, more grounded, more capable of sustaining what is coming without losing itself in the process. Silence has a way of dismantling the structures that were never meant to carry the weight we placed on them. External pressure, performance-driven identity, and false versions of self thrive in noise because noise provides constant feedback, distraction, and reinforcement. When life is loud, it becomes easy to mistake reaction for intention and visibility for purpose. Silence interrupts this cycle. It removes the external stimuli that once dictated pace, posture, and perception, forcing the inner world to become the primary point of reference. This is why silence feels threatening to identities built on approval or momentum. Without constant signals from the outside, the internal landscape becomes unavoidable. External pressure loses its grip first. Pressure depends on immediacy, comparison, and consequence. It convinces the nervous system that something must be done now or something will be lost. Silence dismantles that illusion by slowing time. When nothing is demanding immediate response, urgency weakens. You begin to notice how much of your behavior was shaped by fear of falling behind, fear of disappointing others, or fear of becoming irrelevant. In silence, these fears have nowhere to hide. They surface plainly, no longer disguised as ambition or responsibility. This exposure is uncomfortable, but it is also clarifying. It reveals which pressures were necessary and which were inherited, absorbed, or imagined. As pressure fades, performance follows. Performance exists to manage perception. It is the self that appears productive, strong, spiritual, confident, or successful because it believes worth is contingent on being seen a certain way. Noise sustains performance by constantly providing an audience, even an invisible one. Silence removes that audience. When no one is watching, commenting, or responding, the motivation to perform weakens. Actions that were once fueled by validation begin to feel hollow. This is not loss of drive, it is loss of illusion. What remains is a more honest engagement with life. You begin to ask different questions, not how will this look, but why does this matter? Not will this be approved, but does this align? Performance collapses in silence because it cannot survive without feedback. And when it collapses, false identities are exposed. False identities are not necessarily intentional deceptions. They are adaptive versions of self formed to survive certain environments. They develop in response to expectation, reward, or pressure. Over time, they can become so familiar that they feel authentic. Silence challenges them by removing the environment that required them. When the context changes, the identity loses function. You begin to notice which traits were exaggerated to gain acceptance, which opinions were adopted to belong, and which goals were pursued to avoid judgment. This realization can feel disorienting because it creates a gap between who you thought you were and who you actually are. But that gap is where truth emerges. Silence does not tell you who to become. It reveals who you already are beneath adaptation. As false identities fall away, true motives surface. Motives are often obscured by urgency and performance. In silence, you can no longer hide behind busyness or explanation. You see clearly whether your actions are driven by fear or faith in security or curiosity, love or control. This clarity can be humbling. It may reveal motives that are less noble than you assumed, but it also reveals desires that are more authentic than you allowed yourself to acknowledge. Silence strips away justification and leaves intention exposed. This exposure is essential for alignment because direction cannot be trusted if motive is unclear. Values emerge alongside motives. Values are not what you claim under observation. They are what remain when no one is watching. Silence tests values by removing external reinforcement. If a value is real, it persists without applause. If it was performative, it fades when recognition disappears. Over time, silence clarifies what you are willing to sustain without reward. It shows you what you return to naturally when you are not being evaluated. These patterns reveal values more accurately than any declaration ever could. Direction then becomes clearer, not because options increase, but because distractions decrease. Noise fragments attention and creates false urgency. Silence gathers attention inward and slows decision-making. With fewer inputs competing for authority, intuition becomes easier to hear. Discernment sharpens because it is no longer rushed. You stop mistaking opportunity for instruction and momentum for alignment. Direction formed in silence feels different. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not demand immediate action. It feels steady, grounded, and internally consistent. It makes sense even if it is not immediately validated. This is because it is rooted in clarity rather than reaction. Silence also retrains the nervous system. External pressure keeps the body in a state of readiness, always prepared to respond, defend, or prove. Silence signals safety. Over time, the body learns that it does not need to be constantly activated. This physiological shift is crucial because clarity cannot exist in a state of chronic stress. When the nervous system calms, perception widens. You can see options without panic and consequences without distortion. Decisions become thoughtful rather than impulsive. This calm does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You move with intention instead of urgency. Silence teaches you how to be present without being performative. Presence is different from attention-seeking. It is rooted, responsive, and grounded. In presence, you do not need to announce yourself to feel real. You feel real because you are internally coherent. This coherence is what allows sustainable growth. Without it, any increase amplifies fragmentation. With it, increase integrates smoothly. Silence prepares you for this by aligning internal systems before external expansion. It ensures that when responsibility increases, identity does not fracture. When visibility grows, values do not shift. When resources expand, motives remain clean. Silence does not remove ambition. It purifies it. It does not erase identity. It clarifies it. It does not delay direction. It refines it. What emerges from silence is not a quieter version of your former self, but a truer one. A self that is less reactive, less dependent, and more aligned. A self that knows why it moves, not just how. This is why silence is not absence, but preparation. It strips away what was added for survival, so that what is essential for purpose can remain. Silence feels uncomfortable at first because it removes the structures that once regulated your inner world without you realizing it. Noise activity, constant input, and external engagement act like stabilizers for the nervous system when identity, direction, or security are still externally referenced. They provide distraction pacing and a sense of movement that keeps deeper awareness at bay. When silence arrives, those stabilizers are taken away. The mind and body are no longer buffered by stimulation, and what was previously managed externally now has to be processed internally. This sudden shift can feel like emptiness, restlessness, or unease, but it is not stagnation, it is recalibration. The discomfort comes from increased awareness, not from loss of progress. Silence exposes internal dynamics that were already present but masked by motion. Thoughts that were drowned out by busyness become audible. Emotions that were deferred by urgency surface. Questions that were postponed by obligation demand attention. This exposure can feel overwhelming because awareness expands faster than familiarity. You are noticing more, but you have not yet learned how to hold what you are noticing without reacting to it. That gap creates discomfort. Growth often begins this way. Before something integrates, it destabilizes what was previously automatic. Silence disrupts habits of constant response and forces the nervous system to slow down. For a system accustomed to urgency, this slowing can register as threat. The body may interpret stillness as uncertainty rather than safety, especially if past stability depended on constant effort or vigilance. This is why silence can trigger anxiety at first. It removes the illusion of control created by constant doing. But this reaction is not regression. It is the nervous system learning a new mode of operation. Instead of bracing for what comes next, it is being invited to settle into what is present. That transition is rarely smooth. Awareness also increases in silence, and awareness is inherently uncomfortable when it first expands. To become aware is to see clearly, and clarity often reveals inconsistencies between who you thought you were and how you have been living. Silence makes these discrepancies visible. It shows where choices were driven by fear rather than alignment, where boundaries were porous, and where identity relied on feedback instead of conviction. This confrontation can feel destabilizing because it challenges self-narratives that once provided comfort. But discomfort here is a sign of honesty, not failure. You are no longer numbing yourself to misalignment. You are perceiving it. Internal recalibration requires this phase. Before systems adjust, they must register that adjustment is needed. Silence provides the conditions for that recognition. It allows the mind to sort the emotions to surface and the body to reset. This process is not efficient in the way productivity culture defines efficiency. It does not produce immediate visible outcomes. Instead, it reorganizes internal priorities. Old motivations lose urgency. External validation loses its charge. What once felt essential begins to feel optional. This reordering can feel like loss because familiar drivers are weakening. But what is actually happening is refinement. Energy is being withdrawn from patterns that no longer serve long-term alignment. Growth often feels like disorientation before it feels like clarity. Silence is where this disorientation occurs safely. Another reason silence feels uncomfortable is that it removes performance. When no one is watching, there is no immediate role to play. Without an audience, identity has to exist without reinforcement. This can feel unsettling if self-worth was tied to usefulness, productivity, or perception. Silence asks who you are when nothing is being asked of you. That question can provoke anxiety, but it also initiates maturity. It shifts identity from function to essence. The discomfort is the nervous system adjusting to worth that does not need to be earned moment by moment. This adjustment takes time. During this time, it can feel like nothing is happening externally, which the mind may interpret as stagnation, but internally, integration is underway. Neural patterns are shifting, emotional regulation is strengthening, discernment is sharpening. You are learning to tolerate stillness without interpreting it as danger. This is a critical skill for sustainable growth. Without it, increase creates overwhelm because the system never learned how to rest without collapsing. Silence trains that capacity. It teaches you how to be present without stimulation, how to wait without panic, and how to observe without immediate reaction. These abilities are subtle but foundational. They allow future movement to be intentional rather than compulsive. Discomfort is part of this training because it marks the edge of familiarity. Growth always occurs at that edge. If silence felt immediately comfortable, it would mean nothing new was being integrated. The initial unease signals that awareness is expanding beyond previous limits. Over time, as internal recalibration stabilizes, silence begins to feel spacious rather than empty. The same stillness that once triggered restlessness becomes grounding. This shift indicates that the nervous system has adapted. What was once unfamiliar has become supportive. Silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like presence. This is how you know growth has occurred. Not because things suddenly become loud again, but because quiet no longer feels threatening. Awareness no longer overwhelms. Stillness no longer demands escape. At that point, movement becomes clearer because it emerges from alignment rather than reaction. The discomfort of silence was never a sign that you were stuck. It was evidence that something was reorganizing beneath the surface. Silence does not halt growth. It changes its direction inward so that outward movement, when it resumes, is stable, integrated, and sustainable. Clarity changes the way the mind and nervous system process information. When clarity is present, perception becomes cleaner, meaning fewer internal filters distort what is being seen, heard, or felt. Without clarity, the system operates reactively. It scans for threat approval or opportunity all at once, and responses are driven by emotion habit or urgency rather than understanding. Clarity interrupts this pattern by reducing internal noise. When fewer competing thoughts and fears are active, the mind can assess situations more accurately. This is why clarity sharpens discernment. Discernment is not intuition alone. It is intuition supported by calm awareness. Clarity allows you to separate what is relevant from what is distracting, what is aligned from what is merely appealing. Instead of reacting to every stimulus, you begin to notice patterns, context, and timing. You see not just what is happening, but why it is happening and whether it requires your involvement. This depth of perception is impossible in a state of emotional overload. When clarity increases, reactions naturally slow. Slowness here does not mean hesitation or indecision. It means there is space between stimulus and response. That space is crucial because it allows choice. Emotional reflexes operate without that space. They are immediate, automatic, and often rooted in past experiences rather than present reality. Clarity creates a pause in which the nervous system can regulate before action is taken. In that pause, you can feel emotion without being driven by it. You can acknowledge discomfort, excitement, or fear without letting those feelings dictate behavior. This is how clarity transforms reaction into response. A reaction seeks relief. A response seeks alignment. Reactions are fast because they are trying to escape discomfort. Responses are measured because they are considering consequence. Clarity supports this shift by grounding awareness in the present moment. When you are clear, you are less likely to interpret situations through old narratives or projected outcomes. You are not as easily triggered because you are not scanning constantly for validation or threat. This stability allows you to observe before engaging. Observation is a powerful form of intelligence. It gathers information without commitment. It allows you to sense whether something is genuinely aligned or simply familiar. Emotional reflexes often come from familiarity, not truth. They repeat patterns because those patterns once provided safety or reward. Clarity disrupts this loop by making those patterns visible. Once a pattern is visible, it loses some of its power. You can recognize when a response is being pulled from habit rather than intention. That recognition alone slows the process. Over time, clarity retrains the nervous system. Instead of jumping immediately into action, the body learns that it is safe to wait to assess and to choose deliberately. This retraining is subtle but transformative. It shifts your default mode from urgency to presence. Presence allows discernment to function effectively because discernment requires attention. You cannot discern well when attention is scattered or hijacked by emotion. Clarity gathers attention into one place. From there, decisions become cleaner. You are less likely to over-explain, defend, or justify yourself because clarity does not require constant validation. You know why you are doing what you are doing, so you do not need to convince others or yourself in the moment. This reduces reactive communication. Words become more intentional, silence becomes easier, boundaries become firmer without becoming harsh. Clarity also changes how you experience emotion. Emotions are no longer commands, they are data. You can feel disappointment without collapsing, excitement without impulsivity, and fear without avoidance. This emotional literacy is a direct result of clarity because clarity creates internal order. When the inner world is ordered, emotions can move through without taking over. This is what allows intentional responses to replace reflexive ones. Intentional responses are grounded in values rather than mood. They consider long-term impact rather than immediate relief. They are slower, but they are stronger. Over time, this way of responding builds trust both internally and externally. You trust yourself because your actions are consistent with your principles. Others trust you because your behavior is steady rather than volatile. This stability compounds. It reduces unnecessary conflict, conserves energy, and preserves peace. Clarity does not make life easier in the sense of removing challenge. It makes life cleaner. It reduces internal friction so that energy can be directed toward what actually matters. When clarity sharpens discernment, slows reactions, and creates intentional responses, you move through life with less regret and more coherence. You are no longer controlled by the emotional weather of the moment. You are guided by an internal compass that remains steady even when circumstances fluctuate. This is the quiet power of clarity. Inner stability is the unseen structure that holds every visible aspect of life together. It is the internal condition that determines whether success strengthens you or fractures you, whether relationships deepen you or drain you, whether peace is sustainable or situational. Without inner stability, external gains become weight rather than support. They demand constant management, explanation, and defense. With inner stability, those same gains integrate, naturally enhancing life instead of overwhelming it. This is because inner stability governs how you process pressure, uncertainty, responsibility, and change. It shapes your nervous system, your decision-making patterns, and your sense of identity. Everything else builds on that foundation, whether consciously or not. Success, for example, is often imagined as an external milestone, but its real impact is internal. Success amplifies whatever is already present inside a person. If insecurity, fear, or unresolved scarcity dominate the inner world, success magnifies those states. It introduces comparison anxiety about loss and compulsive proving. Instead of creating freedom, it creates vigilance. Inner stability changes this dynamic entirely. When stability exists, first, success is experienced as expansion rather than threat. You do not cling to it, rush it, or define yourself by it. You can enjoy growth without becoming reactive to its demands. Stability allows you to hold responsibility without becoming rigid, and to experience abundance without losing humility. It keeps success from becoming the sole source of identity, which is crucial because anything that defines you can also destabilize you when it shifts. Relationships are even more directly affected by inner stability. Every relationship functions as a meeting point between two internal worlds. When one or both people lack stability, the relationship becomes a place where unmet needs, fears, and insecurities are projected. This leads to attachment driven by anxiety control or validation seeking. People without inner stability often ask relationships to regulate their emotions, confirm their worth, or give them direction. This creates imbalance and pressure. With inner stability, relationships become places of connection rather than compensation. You are able to engage without losing yourself to care, without overextending, and to set boundaries without guilt. Stability allows you to tolerate discomfort without abandoning connection or abandoning yourself. It makes loyalty a choice rather than a fear response. It also allows you to see others clearly rather than through the lens of what you need from them. This clarity deepens intimacy because it removes manipulation, even unconscious manipulation, from the equation. Peace, perhaps, more than anything else, depends on inner stability. Peace that relies on circumstances is fragile. It exists only when conditions are favorable and disappears the moment uncertainty arises. Inner stability produces a different kind of peace, one that remains accessible even during difficulty. This does not mean emotional numbness or denial of pain. It means that distress does not completely disorganize you. You can experience stress loss or disappointment without losing coherence. Your thoughts remain relatively ordered. Your values remain accessible. Your sense of self remains intact. This kind of peace is not passive. It is resilient. It allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. It creates space between what happens and how you interpret it. That space is what protects peace. Inner stability also affects how you handle time and waiting. Without it, waiting feels like failure or abandonment. With it, waiting becomes purposeful and tolerable. You are able to trust processes that unfold slowly because your worth is not tied to immediate outcomes. This trust reduces urgency, which in turn reduces error. Many mistakes are not caused by lack of intelligence or effort, but by lack of stability under pressure. People act too quickly, say too much, or commit prematurely because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. Stability increases tolerance for ambiguity. It allows you to gather information, observe patterns, and make decisions from alignment rather than fear. This improves outcomes across every area of life. Inner stability also shapes how you relate to yourself. It reduces internal conflict because your actions and values are more aligned. You are less likely to betray your own boundaries or ignore your own signals. This builds self-trust, which is foundational. When you trust yourself, you do not need constant reassurance. You can move forward quietly, confident that you will adjust if needed. This self-trust makes you less reactive to criticism and less dependent on praise. External feedback becomes information rather than a verdict. That alone dramatically improves mental and emotional health. Importantly, inner stability is not something that appears suddenly once everything is figured out. It is cultivated through consistency, self-awareness, and restraint. It grows when you choose regulation over reaction, honesty over performance, and alignment over speed. It is reinforced in ordinary days, not dramatic moments. This is why it is often overlooked. Yet it is precisely this quiet cumulative formation that allows everything else to stand. When inner stability is present, success becomes sustainable rather than consuming. Relationships become mutual rather than compensatory. Peace becomes durable rather than conditional. Without it, even the most impressive external life can feel exhausting and precarious. Inner stability does not guarantee ease, but it guarantees coherence. It ensures that growth does not cost your center and that change does not erase your grounding. In that sense, inner stability is not just the foundation for everything else. It is the condition that allows everything else to function without destroying what matters most. When inner order is established, first, growth no longer feels like a threat to identity. It feels like a natural extension of it. Inner order means your values, boundaries, nervous system, and sense of self are organized enough to absorb change without fragmentation. Identity is no longer something you are constantly negotiating or defending. It is rooted, not reactive. Because of this, life can expand through opportunity, responsibility, visibility, or provision without destabilizing who you are. Growth becomes additive rather than disruptive. Without inner order, growth often creates identity confusion. New roles, new expectations, and new environments demand adaptations, and when the inner world is disorganized, those adaptations come at the cost of coherence. People begin to shape-shift to survive expansion. They perform instead of embody. They adopt external markers of success as substitutes for internal grounding. This is why growth without inner order often leads to exhaustion, imposter syndrome, or loss of direction. The external world changes faster than the internal structure can support. Inner order prevents this collapse by creating continuity between who you were before growth and who you become during it. When inner order exists, identity is anchored in principles rather than positions. You know what matters to you, independent of circumstance. That knowledge acts as a stabilizing force as life changes. Opportunities no longer redefine you. They test your alignment with what you already know to be true. Because your values are clear, you do not abandon them for access or approval. You are able to say yes without self-betrayal and no without panic. This consistency allows growth to feel coherent. You recognize yourself across seasons because your internal compass remains steady even as your external landscape shifts. Inner order also regulates the nervous system, which is critical during expansion. Growth introduces novelty, uncertainty, and increased stakes. A disordered nervous system interprets these signals as threat-triggering anxiety urgency or control behaviors. This is where identity destabilization often occurs. People overwork, over-explain, or over-identify with outcomes because their system is trying to regain a sense of safety. When inner order is established, the nervous system can tolerate stimulation without becoming overwhelmed. You can hold complexity without losing regulation. This allows you to remain yourself under pressure rather than becoming reactive or performative. Growth then strengthens identity instead of eroding it. Another way inner order protects identity is by clarifying motivation. When the inner world is ordered, you are aware of why you want what you want. You can distinguish between desires rooted in alignment and those rooted in compensation. This awareness prevents growth from being driven by unresolved needs for validation, control, or belonging. Instead, growth follows purpose. You expand because it fits, not because it proves something. This reduces the internal conflict that often accompanies success. You are not trying to outrun insecurity or justify your worth through achievement. As a result, growth feels calm rather than frantic. It does not demand constant reassurance. It simply unfolds. Inner order also shapes how you integrate new identities rather than replacing old ones. As life grows, you naturally take on new roles: leader, provider, creator, guide. Without inner order, these roles can eclipse the core self. People begin to live from the role rather than through it. With inner order, roles are understood as expressions, not definitions. You can step into them fully without confusing them for your essence. This flexibility preserves identity. You can engage deeply and still step back without feeling lost. This is crucial for long-term sustainability because roles will change over time. Inner order ensures that identity remains intact through those transitions. Growth also brings increased visibility, and visibility often pressures people to curate an image. Inner order reduces susceptibility to this pressure. When you know who you are, you do not need to manage perception obsessively. You can let your work character and consistency speak without constant explanation. This protects authenticity as life expands. You are less likely to adopt personas that please others but disconnect you from yourself. Authenticity, in turn, reinforces inner order, creating a stabilizing feedback loop. Importantly, inner order does not mean rigidity. It does not freeze identity or resist change. It creates a flexible structure that can adapt without breaking. Think of it as a strong spine rather than a rigid shell. This flexibility allows growth to shape you without distorting you. You can learn, evolve, and refine without losing coherence. Mistakes become information rather than identity crises. Feedback becomes guidance rather than threat. This adaptability is what allows life to grow continuously without destabilization. Ultimately, when inner order is established, first growth feels proportionate. It arrives at a pace your system can integrate. It does not overwhelm your sense of self or force premature transformation. Instead, it confirms what has already been formed internally. Life expands, but you remain centered. Responsibility increases, but peace remains accessible. Identity stays intact because it was built on internal alignment rather than external conditions. This is how growth becomes sustainable. It does not pull you away from yourself. It brings more of yourself into expression. The difference between wealth that amplifies insecurity and wealth that integrates calmly into a prepared life has little to do with the amount of money and everything to do with the internal condition of the person receiving it. Wealth is not neutral in its effect. It acts as an amplifier. It increases volume on whatever patterns, beliefs, and emotional structures already exist. When insecurity is present, wealth does not resolve it. It exposes and magnifies it. When preparation and inner order are present, wealth settles into life as a tool rather than a destabilizing force. Insecurity amplifying wealth arrives faster than the internal system can integrate. It introduces sudden expansion without corresponding stability. The nervous system experiences this as threat even if the conscious mind labels it as success. There is fear of loss, fear of exposure, and fear of inadequacy. These fears drive behavior. People become hypervigilant, controlling, or performative. Money is watched constantly, discussed excessively, and tied tightly to identity. Spending becomes emotional rather than intentional. Saving becomes anxious rather than strategic. Decisions are rushed because the underlying belief is that the opportunity may disappear at any moment. This creates a state of internal noise. Instead of freedom, wealth brings pressure. It demands proof, justification, and display. The person feels they must show that the money is deserved or that it has changed them. In this state, wealth amplifies comparison. Attention shifts outward, scanning for how one is perceived, who is ahead, and who is behind. Relationships often become transactional or strained because trust is filtered through fear of being used or judged. The money becomes a source of identity, and anything that threatens it threatens the self. Calmly integrated wealth operates from an entirely different internal posture. It enters a life that already has structure, boundaries, and self-trust. The person receiving it is not seeking money to complete their identity or regulate their emotions. As a result, the nervous system does not panic when resources increase. There is no urgent need to announce, explain, or defend. Wealth is absorbed into existing systems of decision-making, values, and rhythm. It supports life rather than demanding reorganization around it. Spending reflects priorities rather than impulses. Saving reflects foresight rather than fear. Choices are made with patience because there is trust in continuity rather than obsession with preservation. This type of wealth feels quiet. It does not need constant attention because it is not carrying the weight of self-worth. It is simply a resource to be stewarded. Prepared lives have already learned restraint before increase. They have practiced consistency without immediate reward. They have endured limitation without collapsing into resentment. This history matters because it creates psychological and emotional capacity. When wealth arrives, it feels fitting rather than shocking. There is a sense of proportion. The person knows how to hold responsibility without rushing and how to delay gratification without feeling deprived. This is why calmly integrated wealth does not hijack focus. It does not dominate conversation or decision-making. It exists in the background supporting purpose rather than becoming the purpose. Another key difference lies in how each type of wealth interacts with time. Insecurity-driven wealth lives in urgency. There is a constant fear that the window will close or that the moment must be maximized immediately. This leads to overextension and burnout. Calm wealth trusts timing. It understands that sustainability matters more than speed. The person is willing to wait, invest slowly, and let systems mature. This patience protects both the wealth and the person. It reduces error and preserves peace. Relationships also reveal the difference. Wealth that amplifies insecurity isolates. It creates suspicion and performance. The person struggles to be known because being known feels risky. Wealth that integrates calmly deepens relationships. It does not need to change how people are treated. Generosity flows without spectacle. Boundaries are clear without being defensive. Trust is extended wisely rather than withheld reflexively. The wealth serves connection rather than replacing it. Ultimately, the distinction comes down to alignment. Insecurity amplifying wealth arrives to fill a void. Calmly integrated wealth arrives to support a life that is already whole in its foundation. One creates noise, the other creates capacity. One accelerates unresolved patterns, the other strengthens established ones. Wealth itself does not decide which outcome occurs. The inner state of the person does. When preparation precedes provision, wealth feels like reinforcement. When provision precedes preparation, wealth feels like pressure. That difference determines whether money becomes a burden or a blessing. Wealth is most life-giving when it follows identity rather than attempting to create it, because identity formed internally is stable while identity formed externally is fragile and reactive. When wealth arrives before identity is established, money is forced to do work it was never meant to do. It becomes a source of validation, direction, and worth. This creates pressure. The individual begins to shape themselves around the wealth, protecting it, displaying it, or using it to justify their place in the world. Identity becomes conditional, dependent on income, lifestyle, or status. Any fluctuation in resources then feels like a threat to the self. In contrast, when identity is already formed, wealth arrives as an accessory rather than a foundation. It enhances expression without redefining essence. The person knows who they are regardless of what they possess, so money does not need to explain or defend their value. This distinction is crucial because identity governs behavior. When wealth creates identity, behavior becomes performative. Choices are made to maintain an image rather than alignment. When identity comes first, behavior remains consistent across seasons. The same principles that guided life before continue to guide it after. This continuity is what allows wealth to integrate quietly. Prepared systems are built long before blessing arrives. These systems include financial habits, emotional regulation, decision-making frameworks, and relational boundaries. They are developed in seasons of limitation where discipline is practiced without immediate reward. When wealth follows identity, it flows naturally into these existing structures. There is no need for dramatic adjustment because the internal order already exists. Budgeting, saving, giving, and investing are not reactions to abundance. They are extensions of established patterns. Because the system is ready, the arrival of wealth does not create chaos or urgency. It feels almost uneventful, which is often mistaken for lack of gratitude. In reality, it is a sign of maturity. Prepared systems also receive blessing without explanation because explanation is often driven by insecurity. When wealth creates identity, there is a need to narrate the journey, justify the outcome, or prove legitimacy. Words are used to secure approval or deflect judgment. When identity is settled, silence feels safe. There is no compulsion to announce progress because self-worth is not tied to recognition. The blessing does not need witnesses to be real. It simply functions. Quiet reception is not secrecy, it is stewardship. It protects the blessing from unnecessary exposure while allowing it to do its work. Another reason wealth should follow identity is that identity determines stewardship. Money amplifies character. If character is undeveloped, wealth magnifies immaturity. If character is formed, wealth magnifies wisdom. Identity includes values, self-control, humility, and purpose. These qualities shape how wealth is used. When they exist first, money becomes a tool aligned with those values, rather than a force that reshapes them. This alignment reduces internal conflict. There is no tension between who you are and what you have. The blessing fits. Prepared systems also understand timing. They are not rushed by increase because they were not built in haste. There is patience in how wealth is deployed. Decisions are made with long-term vision rather than short-term excitement. This patience allows wealth to grow sustainably. It also reduces mistakes that come from emotional spending or impulsive investment. Quiet reception protects focus. When wealth creates identity, attention shifts toward management of perception. When wealth follows identity, attention remains on purpose. The person continues to do the work they were doing before, just with greater capacity. This is why prepared lives often look unchanged on the surface, even after significant increase. The rhythm remains steady, the values remain visible. The blessing operates in the background, supporting rather than distracting. Ultimately, wealth that follows identity strengthens coherence. It confirms what was already true rather than introducing something foreign. Prepared systems do not celebrate loudly because they are not surprised. They have been practicing alignment, discipline, and restraint all along. When blessing arrives, it does not need explanation because it makes sense within the life it enters. It feels earned not through striving but through consistency. This is the quiet dignity of provision that follows preparation. Alignment during growth is preserved when the same inequalities that sustain discipline in earlier seasons remain active as increase arrives. Fracture happens when people treat growth as a replacement for what came before rather than as an extension of it. Past discipline is often built in obscurity, restraint, and repetition. Present increase brings visibility options and acceleration. Without intentional continuity, these two seasons can feel disconnected, creating an internal split between who you had to be to survive and who you think you must become to succeed. The qualities of groundedness, humility, obedience, and restraint are what bridge that gap. They ensure that growth does not invalidate the formation that made it possible. Groundedness keeps perception anchored in reality rather than image. As growth occurs, there is more feedback, more opportunity, and more attention. Groundedness prevents identity inflation by maintaining contact with everyday life and ordinary responsibility. It reminds you that your worth was not created by increase and will not be sustained by applause. This stabilizes behavior. You continue to show up consistently rather than becoming performative. Groundedness preserves alignment by keeping your feet in the same soil even as your reach expands. Humility preserves alignment by protecting teachability. One of the fastest ways fracture occurs is when people assume that growth means arrival. They stop listening, adjusting, and learning. Humility keeps the inner posture open. It acknowledges that increase brings new responsibilities that require new wisdom, not less. Humility also protects against comparison. It allows you to recognize your progress without needing to rank yourself against others. This is critical because comparison often pressures people to abandon their own pace and principles. Humility keeps you aligned with your own path rather than distracted by external metrics. Obedience understood as responsiveness to guidance rather than blind submission preserves alignment by maintaining direction. In earlier seasons, obedience often looks like consistency without reward. In seasons of increase, obedience looks like restraint despite opportunity. Both require trust. Obedience prevents fracture by ensuring that momentum does not override discernment. Just because you can move faster does not mean you should. Obedience keeps growth aligned with purpose rather than driven by appetite. It allows you to say no to good options that would compromise long-term integrity. This continuity of response maintains coherence between past discipline and present capacity. Restraint is another essential quality. Discipline formed in scarcity teaches restraint through necessity. Increase tests whether restraint has become internalized or was merely circumstantial. When restraint is preserved during growth, it signals true formation. You are no longer restrained by limitation, but by choice. This prevents indulgence from eroding character. Restraint maintains rhythm. It ensures that rest, reflection, and boundaries remain intact even as demands increase. This rhythm is what keeps growth sustainable. When these qualities are active, growth feels integrated rather than disorienting. There is no need to discard old habits or values to accommodate new capacity. Instead, those habits expand in scale. Generosity becomes more impactful, not more visible. Responsibility becomes broader, not heavier. The past is not disowned, it is honored. This reduces internal conflict because there is no contradiction between who you were and who you are becoming. Fracture often shows up as guilt about past discipline or shame about present comfort. Alignment dissolves that tension. You recognize that discipline prepared you for increase, and that increase validates discipline without negating it. Another way these qualities preserve alignment is by regulating pace. Growth invites speed, but alignment requires timing. Groundedness slows impulsive action. Humility pauses premature certainty. Obedience waits for instruction. Restraint limits overextension. Together, they create a pace that the inner system can sustain. This prevents burnout and identity confusion. You remain recognizable to yourself even as life expands. Finally, these qualities preserve alignment by protecting peace. Past discipline often forged peace through endurance. Present increase must protect peace through wisdom. When growth does not cost peace, it confirms alignment. When peace disappears, it signals misalignment, regardless of success. The preservation of peace is not accidental. It is the result of carrying the same inner qualities forward. In this way, growth becomes a continuation of formation rather than a departure from it. There is no fracture because the foundation remains active. The life expands, but the core stays intact. Sustainable growth depends on maintaining the practices that carried you through lack into abundance, because those practices were not merely survival tools. They were formation tools. They shaped your capacity, your discernment, and your relationship with effort, time, and restraint. In seasons of lack, practices such as consistency, discipline, patience, and obedience are often the only things holding progress together. They train you to act without immediate reward and to remain aligned without external affirmation. When abundance arrives, the temptation is to believe those practices are no longer necessary, that growth now comes from access rather than alignment. This is where sustainability begins to erode. The very practices that felt restrictive in lack become protective in abundance. They prevent expansion from turning into excess and opportunity from turning into overload. Practices built in lack regulate pace. Scarcity teaches you to move deliberately because resources are limited. You learn to prioritize, to delay gratification, and to choose long-term stability over short-term relief. Abundance introduces options. Without the regulating influence of established practices, those options quickly become distractions. People begin to say yes too often, spend too freely, and commit too quickly. The result is fragmentation. Maintaining the same practices preserves focus. It ensures that growth remains intentional rather than reactive. You continue to choose what aligns instead of what impresses. Discipline, in particular, is often misunderstood as something needed only when life is hard. In reality, discipline is most tested when life becomes easier. In lack, discipline is reinforced by necessity. In abundance, discipline must be sustained by values. This shift reveals whether discipline was internalized or circumstantial. Sustainable growth requires discipline that has moved from external pressure to internal principle. This kind of discipline creates stability across changing conditions. It keeps routines intact, boundaries respected, and energy conserved even as demands increase. Consistency is another practice that carries particular weight. In lack, consistency builds trust with yourself. You show up even when progress is slow or invisible. In abundance, consistency preserves identity. It prevents you from becoming someone who only performs when rewarded. Consistency ensures that your character does not fluctuate with circumstance. This steadiness is what allows others to rely on you and what allows systems to scale without breaking. Without consistency, growth becomes erratic. There may be bursts of expansion followed by collapse driven by mood or opportunity rather than principle. Patience learned in waiting seasons also becomes essential in abundance. Growth often brings urgency, the sense that everything must be maximized immediately. Patience resists this pressure. It allows investments to mature, relationships to deepen, and systems to stabilize. Patience protects against the fear of missing out, which is one of the most destructive forces in abundance. When patience is abandoned, people overextend themselves chasing every possibility. Sustainable growth requires the ability to wait even when you could move faster. Obedience or responsiveness to guidance is another practice that must be maintained. In lack, obedience often feels like trust without evidence. In abundance, obedience becomes trust despite evidence. You may see opportunities that seem beneficial, but obedience asks whether they are aligned. This discernment prevents growth from drifting off course. It ensures that expansion serves purpose rather than ego. Many people lose sustainability not because they lacked opportunity, but because they abandoned the guiding practices that once kept them aligned. These practices also preserve humility. Lack often humbles naturally. Abundance tests whether humility has become a choice. Maintaining practices such as reflection, accountability, and restraint keeps humility active. It reminds you that growth is not solely the result of effort, but of timing, grace, and formation. This perspective prevents entitlement and protects gratitude. Gratitude, in turn, reinforces stewardship. When practices are maintained, abundance feels like responsibility rather than reward. Finally, sustainable growth depends on these practices because they protect peace. Peace built in lack is often hard-won. It comes from learning to live without constant control or certainty. Abundance threatens this peace by introducing complexity and pressure. The same practices that once helped you survive now help you integrate growth without losing calm. They create continuity between seasons so life expands without becoming chaotic. Growth that abandons its roots cannot sustain itself. Growth that honors the practices that formed it becomes durable. By maintaining what carried you through lack, you ensure that abundance does not undo you, but instead becomes a natural extension of who you already are. Understanding timing beyond comparison pressure and appearances requires a shift from external measurement to internal readiness. Most people learn to interpret timing through visible milestones. Age, income status, recognition, or how quickly others seem to progress. This framework creates constant comparison. It turns life into a race where being on time means matching or surpassing someone else's pace. Pressure grows in this environment because progress is evaluated by appearance rather than alignment. People feel late not because they are unprepared, but because they are measuring themselves against outcomes they cannot see the full context of. True timing operates on a different principle. It is not governed by speed or visibility, but by readiness. Readiness is an internal state, not an external display. It includes emotional regulation, identity, stability, discernment, and capacity to sustain what is received. When readiness is present, timing aligns naturally, even if it looks slow or quiet from the outside. Pressure distorts perception of timing by creating urgency without foundation. When pressure is high, decisions are made to relieve discomfort rather than to honor direction. People rush milestones to escape the feeling of being behind. This often leads to premature exposure, overextension, or identity fracture. What appears as delay is often protection. Timing that respects readiness ensures that what arrives can be held without collapse. Being on time means that the internal system is capable of carrying the weight of what is coming. Appearances are misleading because they show outcome without showing cost. Someone else's rapid progress may conceal instability, debt anxiety, or unsustainable effort. Comparing yourself to visible success ignores the unseen preparation required for longevity. Readiness accounts for what is unseen. It includes the ability to remain grounded under pressure, to maintain peace during expansion, and to steward increase without losing alignment. These qualities are formed in quiet seasons and cannot be rushed. When timing is understood through readiness, waiting no longer feels like failure. It feels purposeful. You recognize that each season is shaping something specific: patience, discipline, clarity, humility. These are not delays, they are prerequisites. Readiness also clarifies direction. When you are ready, opportunities feel fitting rather than frantic. You are not scrambling to qualify yourself or prove worth. You recognize what aligns and what does not, without excessive deliberation. There is a sense of steadiness rather than urgency. This is a key marker of being on time. Being late feels anxious. Being early feels strained. Being on time feels grounded. Another indicator of readiness is how you relate to control. When you are not ready, you try to force outcomes because uncertainty feels intolerable. When readiness increases, control loosens. You trust process more than pressure. You are willing to wait without resentment and to move without panic. This balance is rare and signals true alignment with timing. Readiness also includes the ability to integrate change without losing self-coherence. Growth often brings new roles, visibility, and responsibility. Without readiness, these changes destabilize identity. With readiness, they feel like natural extensions. You remain recognizable to yourself across seasons. This continuity is a strong sign that timing is appropriate. Understanding timing this way removes comparison from the equation. You stop asking why someone else arrived sooner and start asking whether you are becoming capable of sustaining what you desire. That question is far more constructive. It redirects energy from envy to formation. It also reduces pressure because readiness cannot be rushed by force. It must be cultivated through consistency and integrity. When you recognize readiness as the true marker of being on time, peace increases. You no longer feel the need to justify your pace or explain your process. You trust that what is meant for you will arrive when it fits who you have become. This trust does not create passivity. It creates precision. You move when it is time and you wait when it is not, without self-condemnation. Being on time is not about matching a schedule. It is about matching capacity. When capacity and opportunity meet, timing reveals itself. Until then, preparation is not punishment. It is alignment in progress.